Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Alumless. Welcome. I am Ryan Catherwood, your host. Alumless is a Chris Marshall advancement consulting production. Every other Friday, we plan to bring you an episode of Alumless with me as your host, but starring my friend and boss, Chris Marshall, CMAC founder and CEO. This is designed to be a part talk show, part webinar, but really just a fun way to engage those professionals out there interested in alumni and donor engagement. And of course, we're going to bring a special guest each episode. So be sure to always tune in, and you never know who you might meet here on Alumless. Our main goal is to keep this fun, entertaining, informative, and short. So these are 30-minute episodes. We're going to try hard to keep it that way. Be sure to introduce yourself in the comments section. We can actually read the comments if you just post in the LinkedIn chat that you are checking us out, that you are here and watching us. We can see that. We can interact with you, and we can answer your questions if you want to send them in the LinkedIn chat. So let us know that you're out there, and we're excited to bring the show to you this week. Without further ado, I am going to bring to the show Mr. Chris Marshall, the grand poobah of alumni engagement, the Yoda of alumni engagement, if you will. I don't know. It's early, Chris. How you doing out in California?
I'm in California and doing great. I've already had 2 meetings this morning on Eastern time, so I am ready to go, Ryan. Good to see you.
Great to be back with episode 2. You know, I think when you and I talked about topics, Chris, for each episode of Alumless, we try to come up with topic ideas that our audience will find most interesting and relevant. Why do you think a show that hits on the idea of strategic planning and staff retention is so important at this moment?
The strategic planning piece of it is interesting. That the reason I have it on our list is that it keeps coming up over and over again with clients. That's the main reason, frankly, because we hear more and more institutions looking to think about longer term planning, not just the short term. And the talent part is obvious, right? It's so real right now. Every single client that you and I are working with, and institutions I even touch base with, not even working with, are in the hunt for the right people to fill the right roles. And it's critical now more than ever to have that front of mind. And we're going to talk about a few tips in our conversation, but we're going to bring in somebody who's been through it and just hired some people and still trying to hire some more. And we'll bring that guest in a moment. But they just felt, topical and current. That's why these are on here. And we have a list of the next 6 or 7 weeks where we have guests and topics we think, but I think that'll morph depending on trends that happen in our industry as we go along. So.
Yeah, we'll try to evolve and change the topics on the show as they meet the needs of our listening audience. Yeah. Thanks, Matthew Winston and Michael Randall, for checking in. Great to have you joining us. Appreciate that. We have another LinkedIn user. For some reason, it didn't populate their name, but I know there's others out there checking us out. Josh, great to see you from NC State. So a lot of engagement pros have strategies and conduct planning, Chris, but I don't think and so what is a strategic plan, and why is having one for alumni engagement important?
Yeah, I think, again, I'll be generalizing when I speak about this. There are exceptions to this rule, but as an industry, I think we're really good at the annual planning and figuring out what needs to happen in this year ahead. And even more specifically, month ahead, week ahead, what am I going to do today? We're pretty good at that part. But when I say strategic planning, I'm talking about what's it going to look like in 3 years? What does success look like? What are we going to focus on? That's the word I always use. I always joke about the most important 3 words in alumni engagement is focus, focus, and focus. Like in real estate, it's location, location, location. And it's true. I mean, what happens to most alumni shops, Ryan, is that we keep we're good at addition, we stink at subtraction, and we keep adding things to the plates of our talented alumni professionals, and they're overwhelmed by the day-to-day. And what a good strategic planning process does is allow us to focus on what are the priorities that we're going to do, and equally important is what are we not going to do. The conversation about what are we going to stop or what are we going to say no to when it comes up, to me, is part of a strategic planning process. The other thing I would add to that broader question, we'll get into some more detail, is that a good strategic planning process is not done by the alumni leader in her or his office, nor by just the alumni staff. It's done with collaboration and connection and input from people across the campus, and chance to weigh in, alumni boards, alumni councils having an opportunity, so that it's done with the people who we're going to implement it with, not to the people we're going to implement it with. So strategic planning is a little bit different than annual planning, and that it's going to be a little bit longer term, allow you to focus, and frankly, allow you to say no to some things that you don't think belong on that list.
Yeah, it's definitely a really interesting and relevant topic, Chris. And I think, what we can also think about is, and we've talked about already, is the other important topic for today, which is talent acquisition and retention. And I think they are connected, which what do you think? How are you thinking about this challenge as one of the most important for colleges and universities facing right now? I remember, Chris, talking to someone just yesterday who had pre-pandemic 24 people in the office, and now there's 12, right?
Yeah.
And some of those positions are open again, others are not, right? This is sort of a tough environment for hiring.
Yeah, the Great Resignation, as they say, or whatever it's called now, they have a new name for it, but the is real, and higher ed hit Alumni Engagement, and you'll see that every client I'm working with has vacancies, and they're hiring, and the clients that are going back to the standard traditional methods of hiring, posting, screening for weeks, doing, and 6 months later they find the finalist, and then they've lost 5 people in the search because they've gone somewhere else. Doesn't work anymore. That traditional approach needs to be accelerated. And then ultimately, as you get down to the point where you're making decisions about hiring, flexibility in when they begin, where they live, how often they're in the office, are all real issues today. And again, we're going to bring in somebody who's dealing with these right now. But it's just acute, and it's more than I've ever seen in my 21 years in this business. And moving quickly, like doing a search. Sounds crazy, but doing a search in 4 to 6 weeks is what we should be shooting for to fill these positions. And that's crazy to think about, but we have to be the way, because we'll lose talent in that pool if we don't. And at the other end of that, when you get ready to make the hire, being flexible I think is key. I'm a big fan of remote work environments. There are some jobs that need to be in place in a location, but there are so many things that we can do in our roles that you don't have to be in blank city to run the alumni program for an institution. So
let me just drill down on that one. Do you think that, I also believe that, Chris, that you don't necessarily need to be in close proximity to a campus to run an alumni program there? How do you feel about that?
I see Jesse Phil from NC State just said amen. Some other folks joining in. Good to see people here. So I think the alumni leader position needs to be most alumni leader positions, frankly, are traveling for 40 to 50% of the time anyway. But when she or he are in their home region, being in the office a couple days a week, I think makes sense. Maybe a student engagement type position needs to be on campus when the students are on campus. But just about every other one you could do. I mean, what's the last 2 years have taught us? And I was sort of I wasn't a skeptic, but I was sort of in the middle on whether or not. And then over the last 2 years, I realized it just doesn't matter. You can do almost all these things remotely now. Outside of those few exceptions. And then there's administrative work that needs to happen on site as well. And it's a tough conversation. I had this yesterday with the same discussion with our guest coming up about how and when you apply these flexible rules to what positions is an interesting topic at each institution.
For sure. Our friend Cindy Frederick on a different webinar said UVA has adopted the philosophy of work where and when you work best.
Yeah, that's the most aggressive version I've heard. And I have another client who says, we want everybody here 5 days a week, 8 to 4 or 8 to 5. Yeah. And those are the two extremes. And I think what we're going to see, the industry is leaning more towards the UVA model, maybe not fully where they are, but I love that they said that. That's just awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Justice said, give me a laptop and a Wi-Fi hotspot and I'll do my job from wherever, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's time to bring in our special guest. Which I'm very excited about. And he is actually not in the same room as you, but nearby. You are on the West Coast. So I am welcoming into the stream, ta-da, there he is, John Pine. John Pine is the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Alumni Engagement at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Before joining UCSC, John held leadership positions in alumni relations and annual giving at NYU, including their campus in Abu Dhabi most recently, which we should talk about, John, as well as Emory and Point Park University. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thanks. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
We're glad you're here. Well, let's ask the most obvious first question is, what's it been like to come back from overseas from Abu Dhabi?
It's been a little strange. I was abroad for 4 years, so it's been a little bit of an adjustment coming back to America after being gone for so long. But I don't think I could have picked a better place than coming to Santa Cruz. And if you've never been, it's maybe one of the most beautiful places in the world. So everyone should come visit.
I got a tour yesterday. I can concur. It was just a campus.
Was that your first time on campus, Chris? Or
yeah, first time. I've been in Santa Cruz 30 years ago for a different thing, but first time on campus, and and it's the longest client I've had for a year and almost a half where I've not been on their campus. So it was fun to be here finally.
That's awesome. I'm jealous. I would love to visit Santa Cruz at some point. But John, let's continue the conversation a little bit about some of these topics. And congrats, of course, on your new role. As you begun to learn more about the job of developing your own strategic plan there, what are some of the challenges you're facing? And also, what are some of the opportunities that you have there at UC Santa Cruz?
I think they're both kind of connected, right? The challenges and opportunities are in many ways the same. The biggest is that for us here in Santa Cruz, but also really any school in the world, we've had 2+ years of a completely different model of engagement, which is almost completely virtual. And, the beginning of the pandemic where we would, have some Zoom happy hour and get 500 people to show up. And now I don't think I could pay somebody to come to a Zoom happy hour if I sent them $500. So, including myself, I certainly don't want to go to that. So I think we're now thinking, do we go back to what it used to look like, or do we try to figure out what the future is? And I don't think anyone really has an answer yet. So when we look at a strategic plan, we're trying to figure out how to plan for a world of still a tremendous amount of uncertainty. I think, even the in-person programming that we've had in the past, since I've been here, since the beginning of the year, has sort of had ups and downs, where some things have been really popular and people have come, and other things were like, shaking the trees, and everyone's like, good, I don't feel safe going out yet, or I don't want to go out yet, or that experience doesn't really work for me anymore the way it might have before. So developing a strategy for the future is complicated, I would say.
Somewhat confounding, right? People want different in-person experiences, are hesitant to go out, but they also are tired of Zoom, right?
Right.
And so it gets to be thinking about how are we organizing here, and what is this strategy? What are the tools that maybe our next generation technology tools? What are the types of events and volunteer experiences that are part in-person, part hybrid? So I think you're right. There's a ton to consider. Chris, sort of bounce that question close over to you. You've been working as a consulting partner for UC Santa Cruz for more than a year now. And what's your perspective on strategic planning at the university? And what are John's opportunities in your view?
John's inheriting a staff of initially it was 2 when he first signed on. I think you're up to like 5 or 6 now. Maybe you'll have 7 or 8 in the room eventually. But there was a point where they had 14 people on the staff at Santa Cruz. So they were forced to focus, but couldn't because there were such expectations on everybody. So what you have now is some returning people, a lot of vacancies that we're filling. John's filling. I'm assisting wherever I can, but John's doing the bulk of it. But the people who have survived this transition have been just bombarded. Shana and Barb, I think they might be even on the webinar, on the live stream today, have carried the load for 14 people. So it's going to be, we're spending today actually talking about what are the 3 to 5 things that we're going to focus on over the next 3 years that we can handle with the resources we have. So to me, the opportunity is, again, that focus. What are we not going to do? What are we going to laser in on and say, we're really going to deliver these and do these well, and get the buy-in from partners on campus, get the buy-in from leadership above John, get buy-in from volunteers on the Alumni Council here. Those are all things that if we can get that to happen, then as new ideas come along, we can keep that aside and allow this team that is slowly growing, we hope it to grow even further, to be able to really deliver quality engagement over just trying to keep up and stay above water, frankly. That's where they've been for a while. They've done a great job, and nothing slighting them, but they all need focus. At the end of the day is what it boils down to.
That makes sense to me. And best of luck to you, John, as you're working to reboot there at UC Santa Cruz. I know obviously talent, attracting a talent, retaining talent on your team is a concern, right? We know that. What can be done both at UC Santa Cruz, but also broadly in our field to help attract and keep people in the alumni engagement profession, the field?
Well, I think there's a few things. One, I think we should continue to listen to the chorus of young people who are saying, you need to pay us a living wage to work in a job, right? Where we need to be able to pay people enough money to afford a house in the community that they live in, to be able to consider raising a family. I mean, not to sound too political here, but it's really important. And I think higher ed has been behind the times in paying equitable wages. And I hope that more and more there'll be opportunity to increase salaries. But I think that's one thing. But I think the other thing that is really huge is flexibility. I mean, my whole career, I've always been a big believer in, we have a really cool job. We have a really fun job. I love what we do, but we're not doing surgery, right? We're not like saving the world. So like if people come into this type of profession to have a balance in their life and have flexibility. So like you guys were talking about before, if that's working remote and you want to work, 8 to 4, or you want to work 7 to 3, or if you want to work a 4-day week and a longer 4-day week and have Fridays off, whatever, I think like we have to be accommodating and flexible to whatever work looks like in 2022. I think that there's this concept of the future of work, and it's here, right now. And if we don't seize on that opportunity, then we will continue to lose people to other industries, other opportunities that are more present and more aware of what people need to be happy in their life. And as Chris has heard me say many times the last couple of days, that is the most important thing to me. You have to be happy at work. You have to love what you do. And if you don't, maybe you should go somewhere else. And that's okay, but we have the opportunity to create those spaces that feel supportive and feel engaging and allow people to have a normal, flexible life. And that, I think, is what I hope I can do.
Yeah. That's great.
Ryan froze on me, John.
Yeah, same.
I can. Well said, John. Someone just weighed in, but let me just jump while Ryan is unfreezing. The question we have this written down in advance, so we know where we're going. So I'll pick it up. One area of our work that's typically part of a strategic plan for alumni engagement is connectivity with career services, John. And I know you and I have had this conversation. Thinking about that partnership with career services is relevant to the topic of talent acquisition as well. So how can the office at UC Santa Cruz play an important role, not just in identifying and cultivating talent for your team and but also help alumni find the talent that they need in the student body, if they're recent grads, or anywhere in the alumni population for that matter? I think those two go together somehow, and I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think this is another conversation I feel like I've been having with alums a lot. The most important thing is that when a student graduates today, the work world that they're entering into that any of the three of us graduated into, right? It just looks completely different. So how you engage in that space, how you, make personal connections, which let's be real here. That's part of work, right? We spend a lot of time here. So How do you build personal relationships with people? But I think what we have to do is we have to work with career services to find recent graduates from the last 1 to 3 years who are finding jobs that are fulfilling, that make them enjoy what they do. And those are the people that we have to pull in and quite honestly find less focus on the grads from 10, 20, 30 years ago, because while they're important, I think what we hear from students in particular is that feels aspirational but unattainable, because the world that somebody who graduated 30 years ago entered into they had a living wage, that they could afford a house. They had things that our students today don't have. So if somebody who is, graduated in 1978 is like, you got to work hard and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, a 22-year-old is thinking, yeah, thanks, cool, not going to work for me. And so I think we have to be realistic, right? I think we have to be realistic and honest with ourselves that we should work with career services to find people that are actually going to be helpful for our students that are graduating. And I think that's where we need to prioritize, is the recent grads and engaging them in this kind of work, because I just think it's just much more meaningful to a graduating student and that type of alumni engagement.
I'm back. I was obviously having some internet bugs, but I'm glad to have returned successfully. The question of career services, I think, is a really great one, and definitely lives at the intersection of sort of strategic planning and strategy, and some of the answers to what we're thinking about when it comes to the talent pipeline development. Let's see, Chris, did you ask John the question sort of about?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So Chris, to continue the question from your vantage point on career services as part of an overarching strategic plan, how do you view that importance of that content area?
Yeah, to me, it's appeared in some form. I've done close to 50, maybe over strategic plans in the past year, over a dozen. And in every single one in recent years, it's come up in some form. It's called professional, it's called career, it's called different things. Some places take it as far as alumni career services. I'm not a big fan there. I don't think alumni career services are scalable personally. I think there's other things we can be doing around alumni professional-like development activity. To me, it's the first. If you do a survey of your alumni population, I've seen many of them done. Various entities out there do them. But one of the things alumni will talk about is what they want from alma mater are, especially as you get younger, to John's point, it's even more clear in that youngest group, is they want access to career opportunities, job postings, networking, throw in the word mentoring. There's interest in that. Hard thing to manage at an institution. I totally get that. But one survey recently, 4 of the top 5 things that alumni wanted from alma mater were career professional related. So if we get into the conversation of mutual value, how can the institution continue to add value in the lives of the alums, and not just be saying, hey, here's what you can do for us, volunteer, give us your money, et cetera, but here's what we can do for you. One of the unique things that the institutions own is the network. You can find the network from the institution on LinkedIn, but the brand of the UC Santa Cruz network in this example is unique to UC Santa Cruz, and people will support others who are in that same network. And you almost always get a yes when an alum hears from a student they want help, or a young alum. They'll respond and they'll help. And that's part of what I think we need to be adding into when we talk about strategic planning, for example, is mutual value. What's in it for the alum, and especially for our youngest alums who are dealing with these career and life transitions, where we have older alums that they've been through it, different ages, as John was pointing, but our younger alums who are dealing with the same issues right now, I think are critical. So mutual value are the 2 words I could jump back to on that.
If I could add just 2 on that there's a I think a lot of schools always have this idea that if they build these programs, the people will come. And I just think that that's like, I think for a long time, I've heard people talk about, we need mentorship programs and we need, job postings and so on. We spend a lot of the money on these technologies, and then no one actually shows up and uses them. So like, there's a question of spin. How do we spin this in a way that actually feels supportive? And I think that in some ways, everything old is new again, right? And so the idea of creating actual spaces that are like at companies or like networking groups or specific opportunities around certain career tracks are probably a better approach to be more targeted than the larger kind of like, we're going to have, this tool that we have all these job postings. Like, okay, cool. I can go on Indeed and get that for free. So how do we create things that actually feel meaningful in this kind of space? And that is something that I think is where we need to prioritize.
I'll add too, if you're in the career services world, one of the concepts they talk about is the career community. What's the career community you can put around a student? It's faculty, staff, it's other students, but it's also alumni who've had these experiences. And if you have a student who's interested in entrepreneurship, finance, fill in the blank, any industry or profession, building affinity groups that cut across zip codes and class years, which is the old way that we an important way we engage alumni, are those segments about where do you live and when did you graduate. The segmentation of what is your career professional interest, doesn't matter how old or where you live. We're going to put alums around that, and the value there. And by the way, that model is a scalable model using staff and volunteers to drive those kinds of activities, which could ultimately get to mentoring relationships, jobs, etc. All those things will come, but it's not the job and the mentoring first. It's the community first, the professional industry group, if you will, that's going to drive that kind of activity underneath it. It's got to be scalable and manageable first, I think, is what it comes down to on that side.
I was just going to add the one last thought that, almost every university uses Handshake now. And within that platform, you can find, the hundreds potentially of sometimes thousands, depending on each university, the alumni who have been recently or who are currently trying to recruit students and recent graduates at their universities. And I think there's often alumni shops, they don't know that tool is actually in Handshake. Right. And it's, at a minimum, it's probably all those people probably aren't in the CRM, right? To sort of track that engagement.
Yeah.
So there's a whole pool. You talked about community. There's a whole pool of people there that want to be involved, who are trying to make an impact. And there's a strategy, I think, to be had around engaging those individuals. Chris, to wrap up the show here as we get close to the top of the hour, the other day I was talking to a director of alumni engagement at a state school, and she said, as I mentioned, that the staff is 50% lower than it was pre-COVID. And now there's positions that they're not going to be able to refill. There's also ones that they haven't gotten the right applicant pool. The point being is that to maintain pre-COVID levels is the mandate, but with half the people, right? And so the question now, I think, and for a lot of teams out there, is the reality is they're probably facing a new normal and will likely never get back to the way things were. In your estimation, how should alumni leaders be thinking about staff levels and how to create the right strategic plan to fit the future?
Yeah, you're not going to be surprised that I can give you this answer in 3 words, which is focus, focus, and focus. But to do that, an alumni leader can't just say, look, I have half my staff, we're going to do half these things instead, and we're going to really just do these. What has to happen is that you have to have buy-in from at a VP level, at an alumni board, in some cases level, councils, but all the way up to the president or the chancellor of the institution, so that when the pressure comes from outside or anybody starts to hear, how come we're not doing X, Y, or Z? The answer is because we're focusing on these things right now. I worked for a VP at Cornell, Charlie Flager is now at Virginia Tech, who was really good at saying, we're not going to do that now because it's not part of our strategy. We're going to focus here. Thank you for the suggestion. We'll take it and put it off to the parking lot, but we're going to do these things now. And no matter who the person was with that idea, left that meeting thinking they got heard, but we're not going to do it right now. And that's okay. We're going to focus on the most important things. So you need cover fire to be able to focus at that level. Hard to do. And I know, John, we talked about this just recently, and love to hear your thoughts if you want to add anything to what I had to say. Even in the context of finding talent, how do you, if you have a vacancy and we're looking for somebody in a role and we can't find it, what do you do then with that area? Do you put it off to the side? Do you, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think, where we get this the most is probably from volunteers and from sort of the general alumni population, which is like, you ought to do this. And we think, oh, cool. With what money, but, and now with what staff, right? So I think that's the answer. One of my best mentors from Emory used to say, write down the idea, make anyone feel heard, and then just put it in a file for later when you're able to do it someday.
I love that. It's great.
I won't say who it is, but always inspiration to me. So yeah, that's my thought.
John, it was great. Thank you so much for being our special guest on this episode of Alumless. John is, of course, the new-ish, a couple months now, Assistant Vice Chancellor of Alumni Engagement at UC Santa Cruz. Great to have you. Chris Marshall, star of the show, President and CEO of CMAC. Ryan Catherwood, I'm your host, Vice President at CMAC. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for everyone in the comments section. It was great to see you. And we are a wrap for today. Thanks so much. Have a good weekend.
guys.